Hello! Welcome to the Nowman Show. I am Nowman, the superhero of the present moment. This is Niswander, and welcome to the Nowman Show. And I am here with Dr. Bill Bellows and Tim Higgins. Guys, welcome to the Nowman Show.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. Now, give us a little bit of your bios. Bill, why don't we start with you, a little bit of your background.
I am a mechanical engineer by background. I have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in mechanical engineering. Worked for seven years in Connecticut in the aerospace industry and moved to Los Angeles Aerospace 25 years ago, where I worked for Aerojet Rocketdyne.
Yeah,
Tim Higgins.
I bumped into Bill when I was working there. I taught school for 8 years, high school, and then I got a job in industry with a company, Atomics International, that got bought by Rocketdyne, and then worked at Rocketdyne for 27 years, and it was bought by 4 different companies. Then switched over a weekend. On a Friday, I was working for Rocketdyne. On Tuesday, because Monday was a holiday, I came back as a NASA representative at the same site.
Oh, wow. So you didn't know that on Tuesday that was going to be your...
Oh yeah, the year before I retired, I asked the NASA guys if they were going to need help at the plant there, and they said yes, so I jumped on board.
Oh, excellent. That's great. I'm glad you did.
Me too.
So what we're going to talk about today, though, is business as unusual. You know, most people think of business as usual, which, you know, that's an old word, and we need to move on. So what do you mean in the context of business as unusual?
Good question. The concept is we get so used to things being usual, and our strategy that Tim and I have in trying to convey ideas, we like to come up with contrast, and the most recent contrast is business as usual versus business as unusual. And the concept of business as unusual gets into some simple ideas, one of which is the value proposition of looking at things that are good.
Yes.
And what I started to see in many organizations is we don't spend a lot of time on things that are good. We spend a whole lot of time on things that are not good.
Right.
And I just started to think that we have a choice there.
Yes.
And so that's one of the elements of what we talk about in terms of business as unusual, is a willingness to look at things that are good as a contrast to things that are bad. At least make a decision. It'd be like business as usual would be go to the doctor, start exercising after the heart attack, and you're waiting for trouble, calling the plumber after you have trouble. Business as unusual is the ability to anticipate, like driving your car, having a gas gauge and being able to see how much gas you have, and being able to make decisions in your lives based on being able to see what's going on with a much better sense than I have gas or I don't. The ability to know how much gas and how well things are going.
So it would be kind of like how things are organized rather than necessarily in the context of business. It could be anything.
Yeah, for example, in the context of working on things that are bad, one of the things we do in the school system that I was part of for a while is we test a kid, and what he's bad at, we give him a lot of classes in. Might be better to find out what he's good at and give him a lot of classes in that if you're trying to prompt him to be a continual learner. So business as usual is find out what's broken and work on it, as opposed to find out what's going well and figure out how to make it go better.
So rather than, it's how we do the business.
It's the interactions among all the parts of the business, the people, the machines, the suppliers, the customers, everybody.
Now you both have decades of experience now working in aerospace industry. Can you give us some specific examples of understanding how this works in that industry?
Well, in that industry, one of the things that happens is, as most organizations do, they take a big complex project and they break it down into individual parts, and then they try to manage the parts separately. And as a result, you've got a guy that's making a wheel, and some of them come out with different sizes, and the guy's making blades that go around the outside of the wheel. and they're in two different departments, and one of them decides to make his blades better. They have a little bit of variation in them. Better for him is to make them the same size, almost all of them. However, the guy downstream that does assembly, that takes the wheels and the blades and puts them together, has to make a pattern of blades that go around the outside, and there are no gaps and overlaps. He was using the variation in the blades to mix and match so he could get no gaps and no overlaps. When the guys improved the blades and sent them down to the assembly area, because the wheels aren't all the same size, but the blades were, you have some assembly that cannot happen. So you stop the assembly line by making one of the parts better. It's a very common activity.
So, but instead of looking at the whole thing, you're looking at the pieces. So in other words, if you have one piece that has to fit into another piece, then that gap means that something's got to go in the middle, a screw or something. And so that whole system of design there has to include that gap instead of just the two pieces that come together.
Yeah, not just aerospace, but what we found in the last 25, 30 years, Tim's experience in school systems, my other experience in aerospace and visiting other companies, is the way organizations are organized from universities. We take a university and divide it into the School of Engineering, School of Medicine, School of Architecture. Then within those organizations, we break them down into departments. Likewise, in our organizations, we break it down to Department of Engineering, Manufacturing. And then we take a product, an automobile or a piece of software, and divide it up. And so we're constantly in the process of taking something and dividing it up. And then your job in the organization could be responsibility for the cap. Mm-hmm. We may have the bottle outsourced, and everyone in the organization is then focusing on something. It could be the third grade class, or it could be this cap, or it could be cleaning the restrooms, or buying the paper towels. It's very easy in these organizations for people to lose track of how their work affects others. The simple example is you're looking at the difference between two heart surgeons. The difference doesn't show up on paper. See, in business as usual organizations, we can compare heart surgeons. Actually, worse than comparing them, we treat them as all the same. All heart surgeons are the same, all parking spots are the same, all engineers are the same. What we're missing is that the difference between the surgeons, the difference between two bottle caps, shows up, to your point, in use.
Yes.
But we're not responsible for the use. We're just
Right.
responsible for the buying of the cap. And so we buy the paper towels, buy the cheap paper towels, and lose track, and maybe not even know that the people downstream with the cheaper paper towels are taking longer than we're saving. And what Tim and I had seen is that's a pattern that plays out in government, in the universities, and most organizations.
Exactly. And you guys have studied the work of individuals that would be experts, I guess, in what you would call business management theory.
Yes.
Such as W. Edwards Deming, Russell Ackoff, Junichi Taguchi, just to mention a few. Why is Deming such an important figure in understanding more about how we organize our work?
What Dr. Deming was able to do is take what was going on and explain what was happening and what to do instead. Came up with this idea of there are 4 separate disciplines that it's amazing that he managed to connect. One is called psychology, having to do with how people and groups think and act. The other is variation. Stuff varies, like the bottle caps and the size of the blades. He talked about systems and appreciating a system, and he talked about being able to create new knowledge. Those are 4 very different things. He brought them together and said, if you can understand that and apply it to what's going on, you can learn a lot about your organization and continue to learn and make it better and better.
So he created basically the idea of what is now coined the system of profound knowledge. Is that correct?
Yes, and he once said, if somebody can think of a better name, he'd be happy to use it.
I couldn't think one if I wouldn't even try. I think that's outstanding. Why don't we watch a clip right now that actually features William Edwards Deming with Russell Ackoff? Let's check that out right now.
All goes back to understanding a system. And that is the way I taught the Japanese top management in 1950. The aim of the system. Draw a flow diagram. What happens? What happens next? And in that flow diagram, anybody may see what his job is. A flow diagram is an organization chart. Anybody that works there, maybe pupil, maybe teacher, maybe principal, maybe a parent, can see what his job is.
The characteristic way of management that we have taught in the Western world is take a complex system, divide it into parts, and then try to manage each part as well as possible. And if that's done, the system as a whole will behave well. And that's absolutely false, because it's possible to improve the performance of each part taken separately and destroy the system at the same time. Question of how do you get people to think systemically, I think was best answered by a vice president of Bell Telephone Laboratories back in the 1950s, when he invented a procedure that's come to be known as idealized redesign. What he said is the only way that we can think creatively about a system is to assume it was destroyed last night. It no longer exists. So the education system in the United States was destroyed last night. Now, if you could do whatever you wanted to right now to replace it, what would you do if you were completely unconstrained? His argument was, if you don't know what you would do when you can do whatever you want right now, then how can you possibly know what to do when you can't do whatever you want? That forces you to study the whole instead of the parts taken separately. It's the greatest sin of analytical thinking. It goes back to the Renaissance, when for the first time in the history of man, we analyzed human activity and divided it into three categories: work, play, and learning. We then developed institutions for each of them taken separately, so that you have a school where you're supposed to learn but not do anything useful, and certainly not have fun. You have things like country clubs or baseball stadiums where you're supposed to have fun but not do anything useful or learn anything. And you have a place of work where you're supposed to get something done but not learn anything or have any fun. And we had the usual analytical problem. We have three kinds of institutions that we couldn't get together. What we're beginning to become aware of, it seems to me, that none of these things can be accomplished effectively taken alone. That we need a reintegration of work, play, and learning. And some interesting things are happening. Last year, for the first time, if the numbers are correct, corporations in the United States spent more on education than all the universities and colleges put together. So the distinction between work and learning is beginning to break down. Now, the quality of work-life movement, on the other hand, is trying to break down the distinction between work and play. How do you make work fun?
Easy. I want to understand who depends on me. Then I may take joy in my work.
Now, did Deming believe that the way to solve problems means changing the system? Bill, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, a couple things there. One, he would say, and he said it again and again, that the system cannot understand itself. And so when I read his book, The New Economics, which came out in 1993, just before he died, and in there he outlined his system of profound knowledge. And I had met him in 1990, but in those 3 years, in the ensuing 3 years, the book meant so much to me, because what I was beginning to see in the book so clearly is that he was able to articulate organizations in terms of how they operate, and yet, unbeknownst to people in the organization, there's a solution for what's going on, but you're so mired in the system that you can't. His comment was that people in the system can't see the system, and others have defined the system using terms like water, and the comment, one explanation is we don't know what fish talk about, but you can be damn sure it's not the water. What Deming is talking about is the water.
Yeah.
And he offers, as Tim pointed out, he said, we need to understand variation, which means what? Which means every parking spot is the same, every surgeon's the same, every cap is the same, every snowflake is the same. Yet when we manage in business as usual, we tend to think of things being interchangeable.
Yes.
The software language, plug and play. So we tend to think in terms of things being identical. People are identical, tables are identical. And what the variation piece is saying is that people are not identical. These caps are not as identical, and we're not taking that into account, which creates the problems we see in organizations.
And also,
we're talking about problems, and there's an interesting, depends on how you want to define a problem. One of the things Deming would talk about is the distinction between the variation that you're getting that's normal and natural in a system. A bunch of work Walter Schuhart did in the 20s indicated that natural systems and man-made systems vary within a range that's absolutely predictable. When you get variation outside that range, that's a different story. Something's infected the system. And you treat those two conditions differently. If you're getting variation and it's routine and you don't like it, you need to change the system. If you're getting variation, like my gas mileage runs 28 to 32, if I don't like 28 to 32, I need to change something.
Yes.
If it starts running at 20, something's different's going on, and I need to find what caused that. That's a problem. And by the way, making that problem go away doesn't improve the system. My gas mileage, if I make it go away, goes back to 28 to 32. You have to do that, but it's not an improvement to the system.
That's absolutely true, and that's on all levels.
Yes.
I mean, from what you could say in society, from the very top all the way to the most minute function, in a business or just in day-to-day life. And that's the brilliant part of how all this can apply, which we'll get into in the second half of this show. So why don't we take a little bit of break, and we'll be right back more on Business as Unusual with Bill Bellows and Tim Higgins.
Hi, I'm John Fugelsang, and when I'm in LA, I like to buy lots of shoes and not walk anyplace. But also, I like to watch the Nowman show because it is better than the best show on all of TV.
The Nowman show is also on YouTube. Now! All right, we are back in the studio with Bill Bellows and Tim Higgins. Now, as far as business is concerned, I mean, you guys have a lot of experience, obviously, in education and in what we'd say multinational or big corporate environments. But this concept also, as you've mentioned, also applies to the public sector, government, even small business, and I would even go so far as to say a worker-owned cooperative. What are some other examples of contextualizing that would explain why it's important to see this on a very large scale, a different way of thinking about our thinking?
Well, one of the things we have theorized and have lots of evidence to support is that how we behave depends on how we think. And if our thinking remains the same, our behavior is going to remain the same, and whatever we've been doing is what we're going to be doing. If we want to do something different, we have to change how we view the world, or at least become more aware. Our alternatives are to help people, one of the alternatives is to help people become more aware of their thinking and how it affects their behavior. And it's fundamental. We don't even recognize how our behavior is affected by our thinking.
That's right.
I ask people in a classroom sometimes, how many of you believe that preventing failures is better than letting things run to failure? And usually 2/3 to 90% of the people will raise their hands. And the ones with their hands up, I say, how many of you change your kitchen light bulbs before they fail? None of them do, but they believe that preventing failure is better than letting things run to failure. They haven't recognized that sometimes they think they let things run to failure. They haven't recognized that they always have the choice of letting things run to fail or taking preventive action. Bringing that awareness to their conscious forefront allows them to make the decision rather than accidentally doing it.
So that becomes thinking about the thinking is part of the academic setting, and before a person gets into a task of any kind, the focus should be on your thinking process, right? Is that correct?
As you're doing the task,
Yeah.
it should be also, should I be acting preventively here, or should I be letting things run to fail?
The two of you created this organization called End-to-End Thinking, which is where I met Bill originally and then met you, Tim. So tell us about what that is and how that got started.
All right. Tim and I, in the 2000, 2001 timeframe, met with some other friends, and we thought it was time for us to take the activities we were currently engaged in and expand upon them further. And the idea that came to mind was to host an annual conference, which we refer to as a forum for exchanging ideas. We've done this 14 times. Our 15th event is coming up next year. And our vision is that most of us are working in relatively the same business as usual organization, which is reactive, but not reactive, as Tim's talking about, not reactive by choice, but reactive by default. Because who would think of going to the doctor when you're well? Who would?
Yeah. I do.
There you go. And so what we envisioned is the possibility of engaging people such as people in the Deming community. Dr. Deming had died, but we thought of engaging people in the Deming community that he mentored. Russ Akoff, you mentioned, we featured Russ on several occasions. And the ideas of Junichi Taguchi and Tom Johnson and Gypsy Randy and others. But to give you an idea of what business as usual is about and how subtle it affects all of us, and it's a simple example I like to use, is on a very regular basis, we ask others ask us, how'd you do on the exam? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'll ask that question, and people say, have you asked the question or answered the question? Yes. And I'll write the question on the blackboard and say, is there anything about that question that strikes you as odd? And people say, is it the do, the exam? And I kid you not, again and again, the you is like the last word anybody focuses on. Why would you challenge the you? How did you do? But I said, no, the issue is the you. So when I ask you, how did you do on the exam? What is implied by that? And just last week I asked, and somebody said, you mean on a curve compared to others? I said, no, how did you do on the exam? And what I eventually explained to the person is, I didn't say, how did we do on the exam? And she says, okay. And I said, so if I ask, how did you do on the exam, then the implication is that I'm the professor and you're the student. And by saying, how did you do, I'm implying that your ability to learn has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with your
That's
classmates, nothing to do with the book, nothing to do with the design of the room. Yep. And so in a business as usual environment, what we're really doing, and what Tim's been talking about, is we're looking at things in isolation. We're looking at students in isolation. So the student doesn't do well, we say, what's wrong with you, as opposed to what's wrong with my teaching style, what's wrong with the book, what's wrong with the lighting. And so in creating the Into and Thinking Network Forum, our strategy was, we've all somehow, to varying degrees of success, went through a school system that had us believe this.
Yeah.
And most will die never knowing there's something else going on. Yeah. And then, but on the other hand, when I kid college students, is the good news is you've been engaged in this system for your entire life up to 20. Now you're going to go enter a business as usual organization with the same patterns and beliefs that you're separate from everyone else. But what we had in mind in creating the Into and Thinking Network Forum is, what if we could create a place that challenges that every year and invite in people who have somewhere along the lines, as you have, gotten at least a little bit of a crack in the armor. There might be something else going on.
Exactly.
And then what would it be like to engage people in another universe wherein things are connected and not separate?
So in the Into and Thinking Network, you're bringing together people from all perspectives now. You have, I've seen people from automotive, from rocket science, from education, from marketing, from accounting,
healthcare,
and music and art and media. So we're all over the place, realizing that, hey, this is a commonality here. So tell us a little bit more about the forum and exactly how that came about and what is involved in that, for those who have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, we had some very humble beginnings, and our strategy was to, as you would do in any organization, more so in business as unusual, is take the resources you have and try to do as much as you can with them. And so our strategy was to take the resources of the place where we worked and use the conference rooms as settings for learning. use a nearby hotel, engage with people in the Deming community, the Akoff community, and the Taguchi community who had expertise and were willing to appear pro bono, which has been a hallmark of our effort, that we can provide exceptional ideas at an exceptional price, exceptional meaning low price. And then another strategy was to provide it in the Los Angeles area that would allow our coworkers to participate, brush elbows with people like the Dean of West Point or the Director of Planetary Sciences from NASA headquarters, and just be reminded of what teamwork means.
Exactly, and so this is a week-long event, right?
5 days.
It's 5 days technically, and now it's going to be taking place in 2016. Where at?
Yes, we're going to be at Woodbury University and Burbank for the second year. We start on Wednesday, June 8th, and on Sunday, the 12th.
And so you're going to have a wide array of speakers and events and...
Oh yeah, we've got 4 days, 3 days of pre-conference sessions. These are 3-hour sessions, 6-hour sessions, and a couple 2-hour sessions from Wednesday through Friday. We have a daily activity fee, which we try to keep down, and other than that, there's no fee to attend, there's no parking fee. One of our presenters is this retired CEO of the Great Plains Coca-Cola Bottling Company.
Right.
And then it's Bob Brown, and then Dick Steele, who is chairman of the board of his company, is going to be talking about how he brought Deming's ideas to his organization. We've got people from across the United States presenting, as well as the UK. And then on the weekend, we have a larger fee because we're flying in the speakers. And so we're at several hundred dollars on the weekend. And there we begin Friday night for dinner through Sunday at noon. We have 4 keynote speakers and 6 speakers in parallel sessions.
That sounds fantastic. So if anybody wants to check this out further and communicate with you, you have events also, right, locally?
Yes.
On a monthly basis?
Yes.
Yes.
So, and it's based on this whole idea of end-to-end thinking,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
So how can people get a hold of you guys if they want to participate in this locally?
Best way is contact me, Bill at in2in.org, or Tim at in2in.org.
Awesome. Thank you guys for being on the Nowman Show. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Bill Bellows and Timothy Higgins. My name is Niswander, and you're watching the Nowman Show.